What up, Pittsburgh Steelers fans? Matty P here with another episode of Steelers Touchdown Under, here to talk about Steelers rookies, starts, snap counts, what to expect in 2023. What can fans expect to see from these players in terms of how much they're going to see the field? As always, if you do like our shows, hit that like button. If you're not a subscriber yet, but you are enjoying our content, please hit the sub button as well. All right, let's get straight into it. So the Steelers selected a number of players in this year's NFL draft. Most Steelers fans would be aware of those guys. We selected 7 players. We had a first-round pick, 2 second-round picks, a third-round pick, a fourth-round pick, 2 seventh-round picks. Now, unfortunately for Corey Trice Jr. out of Purdue, he's going to miss the season. He's on IR. Not a surprise to anyone. He actually means no snaps, no starts for him. So we'll have to pull him out of the mix, unfortunately. But let's kick it off with, let's go in order chronologically. Broderick Jones, offensive line, really offensive tackle, as we as Steelers fans know this. What sort of amount of starts and snaps could he play? Now, it is interesting when we're going to talk about some of these players. I'm not going to provide starts for everyone because if you think about it, depends what scheme you line up in. So it's kind of probably easier a little bit to do it for the offense, depending on the position they play, particularly offensive tackle in this regard. But it is a little bit more difficult for like a Joey Porter Jr., for example. So I'm going to give a prediction of starts based on what I'm saying, but it could be higher than that based on the scheme that the Steelers adopt whether they're playing offense or defense. All right, tackle-wise. So as you can see in front of you, Darnell Jr., Chooks almost played 100% of the snaps, like 0.09% was like minus was all that Chooks didn't play last year. So I think it was literally he played the 1159, not 1160 snaps. Now, the Steelers picked Broderick Jones at 14, traded up from 17 to get there, traded up 3 spots. The Jets were probably in for him at 15. So it was really important they did make that trade to secure Broderick Jones to be able to get a great tackle out of Georgia. He was actually my top-ranked tackle in that draft process. I said that throughout the whole draft process on this channel. So now, the other thing about the snap counts too, I'm using Pro Football Reference's snap counts. With the snap counts, you go into any of these players from last year in 2022, the snap counts will be higher on their individual pages because it'll do it per the amount of snaps they played in terms of the games that they played. This is in terms of the overall season statistics based on the game books, right? Now, as I said, Darnell Jr. 100%, Chooks almost 100%. We've got basically 3 guys that can start at tackle and 2 spots. So when it comes to snaps, I do think you will see whoever is starting will play almost 100% of those snaps, I would say. We could also see where 3 of them take the field, where Dan Moore might be the swing tackle in this regard. You might have him there as like like the Zach Banner kind of role, eligible, receiver on the field kind of thing. I think the Steelers need to do that because of what they've got in Darnell, Washington, because of what they got in Cam Heyward, and even when you start bringing Gunnar into the mix. But it is an interesting thing to go, how many starts will he get? Well, I think Dan Moore will start the first couple of games. I do really think that. So I think rather than talking about snaps, I think for Broderick Jones, it's a matter of, does he get more than 12 starts this season? I say he does. I do say he gets 12 starts. I'm going to take the 12 starts or over on that. I'd love to know what you think in the live chat as well, in terms of how many starts you think he'll have. Will he start the season? Will he be starting against San Francisco? Has Dan Moore done enough to hold down the job? Kind of keen to see that. Do we see midway through the season Dan Moore playing more at right tackle? A lot of people think Chooks is that big deal a couple of years ago. He can actually get moved on this year pretty quickly. What if a tackle goes down, before deadline day, for the draft deadline day, or what if the Steelers think, hang on, let's see what we've got in the mix here, and it should be best player, most informed player that starts, in my opinion, and that might mean that at the end of this season, maybe if it's not the trade deadline, Chooks becomes expendable. Now, I say these things, people go nuts. But at the start of the year, start of the offseason, I said they would trade Kevin Dotson before the season starts. And by midway at the start of training camp, or between OTAs and training camp, I said that they'd try and move Kendrick Green for a late round pick if they could. Both those things happened. Just saying, both those things happened. But yeah, so as I said, Broderick Jones, I'm going to take the over on 12 starts. Let's go to the second round pick, the first of our second round pick, who was actually the 32nd spot. Any other draft, he'd be a first rounder, Joey Porter Jr. Now, this was kind of interesting when I went and had a look at the defensive percentages, because Cam Sutton He played like over 87.5%, as you see here, of the offensive snaps last year. Levi Wallace, it has him at 66.64% of the offensive snaps, but actually, if you go into his page, I know it's off by heart, he played 76% of the snaps in games that he was available for. Now, you had a Keller Witherspoon in there who they were trying to make the second top corner. He only played 23.31% on snaps on the year, but he only played in like 4 games. So it's kind of, it gets a little bit misleading when you think about how some of these stats get represented in terms of those games. And in pulling it up, pulled up Keller Witherspoon for you guys now. Yeah, he played, as I said, he played about 40% of those snaps in terms of the games that he was in. So when it comes to Joey Porter Jr., we've obviously brought Patrick Peterson in. We do have Levi Wallace there. And now you bring James Pierre. The other difference that was kind of interesting is when we get to DeMonte Kazi, because the Steelers will try and play a bit more 3 safety this year, particularly the way I think what they wanted to do a bit more of last year. Then Kazi got injured. We know he missed those first 6 games. Kind of changed the course of what his number of plays on the field in 2022 look like. So when you think about Joey Porter Jr., as I said, it's hard to steal depending on who starts on offense or defense. It depends on what the scheme is, all those different things. So I'm not going to do starts for Joey Porter, but I do think Joey Porter playing somewhere between where Levi Wallace was at 66%, and definitely a lot more than Kazi or Keller Witherspoon or Pierre, because Pierre's in the mix there with just under 25%. I think if Joey Porter Jr. can someone get between 55 to 70% of the snaps, he'd be doing pretty well. I think still fans will be a bit surprised. And obviously, there's some games, depending on schematics and stuff like that, that he'll play more versus less. Particularly thinking about like the Bengals, where they've got three wide receivers plus a good tight end to cover, and you've got like T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd. You probably want someone covering up on them, doing that, able to do that big press coverage as well. Hayden Hurst, I think, is their tight end, so they can do a few things there. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a bit more of Pierre in some of those sorts of games, even against the Ravens and some of the tall receivers. And a guy like Mark Andrews in that regard, and particularly when Neal's come down into the box. So I think somewhere between that 55% to 70% mark, it might be that he's playing 70% in the games that he features in, and then it's 55% on the season. That's not a fail from him for a Steelers fans' perspective. It is his rookie year. So we do need to keep that in mind as well, is that like not every rookie plays a heck ton of snaps in their first year in the NFL, particularly not with the Steelers. Now, let's go to the other second-round pick, Keanu Benton, the nose tackle or defensive tackle, defensive end, interior defensive lineman, however you want to designate him. It's different sites, different things. I think the Steelers are probably just to designate him as, an IDL, interior defensive lineman. But Keanu Benton, so I was having a look at the stats here. So it says here Chris Wormley played in 31.7% of the snaps, defensive snaps last year. Now, obviously, we know he got injured. So, and missed the rest of the year, no longer with the Steelers. So you can't, I don't really want to base it off those snaps in terms of what he had from that perspective. But what I do know is that he played, I think it was 40% of the snaps in the 40% of snaps in the games that he was able to play in versus that's 33 overall for the year. But obviously, as I said, we know that he got we know that he had that injury, and then that's forced him to miss a lot of the year. So I'm just pulling up on another window what those exact snaps were, and yeah, he played 40% of the snaps in the games he was available for. He played in a lot more than 6 games. He played in 13 games. In my head, I had him there at 6 games, but regardless, Benton, you probably want to see a bit more than that. It was kind of interesting when I looked at Tyson Alualu, who played about 30% of the snaps overall on the year. I think he'll play more than, I do think they'll play Benton more than Wormley and Alualu for what he can do. But remember, look at these snaps where you've got Ogunjobi in there, Cam Heyward's in there. So Cam Heyward's number's probably going to come down a little bit. That's one of the other things that we might see, is that like they start looking at where they're rotating Heyward, and you have this sort of trio rotation, kind of like what we might see at linebacker, and we'll get to that when we talk about Nick Herbig, but sort of this 3 rotation where it's majority of the time it is Heyward and Ogunjobi, but you start seeing Benton make his way in there in a way that you didn't necessarily think going into the season. And then what that means is that one, Cameron Heyward stays fresher and so does Ogunjobi as you go into the latter parts of the season, into the playoffs. And two, at a guy like Cam Heyward's age, this is the sort of thing at 34 that could keep him in the league for not just this year, not just next year, but even, in 3 years' time, he could still be playing because he's able to stay fresh. Now, as I said, Cam Heyward had 75% of the snaps in the games he played in last year. That's accurate with here. There are some discrepancies on some players, so I'm trying to check the most important ones for you to get that basis. So on that, all things being equal, Keanu Benton, if he can have sort of 50 to 60% of the snaps, I think that's going to be a really, really I think it'll be hard for him to get more than 60%, but somewhere in that 50 to 60 range would be a really successful rookie year for Keanu Benton. And probably a lot more than, Cameron Heyward in his rookie year, remember, only played 27% of the snaps. And then the following year, he played 77% of the snaps. So it'll be interesting to see how that rolls. All right, third player on the list that we're going to talk about. Sorry, the fourth player on the list we're going to talk about. Third rounder, 93rd pick overall, Darnell Washington, tight end. Now, we're going to see him on the field a stack because the thing with Darnell Washington, obviously they've released Zach Gentry. Mark and I talked about this a couple of days ago on our show. We think he'll some way work his way back to the roster. But I do think that Darnell Washington offers a bit more in the receiving game and really offers even a lot more in the blocking game, just purely because his size and his weight. Now, Zach Gentry played almost 50% of the snaps last year. Pat Freiermuth played 64%. So I think they'll play Darnell Washington about 55% of the time. Now, remember, they've got guys like Connor Heyward that can block. Connor Heyward, as you guys might be able to see on your screen right now, only played 15% of the snaps last year. I think you're going to see a lot more of that this year. So I think when it comes to Zach Gentry and comparing him to Darnell, I think Darnell offers more. I also think they ask a lot of Pat, and they want to be smart and strategic with Pat as well. Has had a couple of concussions. I'm not saying that's an issue for him, necessarily deep long term. But again, when you're playing AFC North football, the ability to work in Darnell Washington is going to be huge, and particularly if Broderick Jones is starting. I said this to Mark a few weeks back on one of our shows. I do feel like because of the left side where Darnell Washington was quite strong at Georgia when you go back and look at the tape, I think if Broderick Jones starts, more games or manages to start first game of the season against San Francisco 49ers or comes in before the first 4 games are complete as the starter, I do think you'll see more of Darnell Washington early on there to sort of help Kenny Pickett keep clean, help them build that chemistry, help give Broderick Jones a sort of safer environment to develop based on what his experience and comfortability is and time spent having Darnell Washington there. You saw it a bit during the preseason as well, the way the Steelers were looking at how these guys work in tandem. It's no secret that the Steelers, despite the injury cloud that really looks like it might not exist around Darnell Washington, they went and picked the left tackle. They picked the guy beside him who's basically a tackle that can catch the football. It's crazy stuff. So I think we'll see a lot of Darnell Washington. I think we'll see more from him than we did from Gentry. But given Pat Freiermuth played 64% of the snaps, I do think we probably are looking at, maybe 55% of the snaps. I think it'd be where we're going to see from Darnell Washington. And you know what? That's pretty awesome from a tight end, particularly when you're not going to be tight end number 1 on the roster. Let's be frank. It is Pat Freiermuth tight end on the roster. He's the number 1 guy. 68% of the snaps in games that he played last year. So you can see that's higher than 64%. But that is because Pat only played in the 16 games, not 17. So that's a difference for him as well. All right. So we've got there about 55% of the snaps for Darnell Washington. I think he'll play in most games. Let's move on to Nick Herbig, linebacker. Now, this is kind of interesting when we get to Nick Herbig because Malik, obviously TJ Watt missed over 6 weeks last year. Malik Reed, according to the snaps you see on the screen in front of you, played 37.22% of the snaps. If you actually look on his page, and he played over 40% of the snaps because you got to look at games when he was back, when TJ Watt was back. What does Nick Herbig play in this regard? What does it look like with Herbig and some of the other rotation with some of the other linebackers in terms of sub packages? You saw a bit in the preseason, the Steelers playing a 4-4 defense, which I feel like we haven't seen in a while. Where Highsmith actually was not on the front line rushing. Highsmith came in from that second 4, if you like, which I found kind of interesting from that perspective. Now, Herbig is going to be used all over the place. Now, we're not talking about special teams. We're just talking about defensive snaps. I think he can, and you look at Spillane there with 55% and the way he came on late. I think Herbig, if he played 50% of snaps, I think that would be a massive win. I hope for him he plays more than 40% because I want to see him develop him. Again, this goes back to the kind of the rotation we're talking about with Benton, Ogunjobi, Heyward. You get Highsmith, Herbig, TJ Watt, and it'll be very situational football, scheme specific in terms of where they're rotated in. But Herbig could really help give TJ Watt, a good breather, or even give Highsmith a breather to keep them fresh and just keep it coming. And you think about the other thing too. We've talked about it from a defensive line perspective, and now I'm talking about from a linebacker perspective. The pass rush for the Steelers is going to go nuts. Mark did a show on this 4 or 5 days ago now. You can find it on our channel if you haven't watched it, about bringing Blitzburg back. Go back and check that out. Honestly, I do think Herbig can, and when you put in Herbig and Benton and how well they've done as rookies, we've got our Steelers fans keep a lid on it a little bit because, as we saw with the example with Cameron Heyward, only played 27% of the snaps. But it is exciting stuff for the potential for 3-man rotations across the pass rush. And that is a nightmare for a Steelers team that already know how to get sacks. Last year, TJ Watt out, they only had, I think it was 40, 41 sacks on the year. This team could get over 55 sacks this year, all things being equal. I think they can get back up to that level. I definitely think they'll surpass 52 sacks. I've got them on the over 52 sacks, basically, in what I'm predicting. But anyway, yeah, going back to Herbig, do you think he can play 50% of snaps? That's 1 in every second defensive snaps? Or do you think it's more like 1 in 4, 1 in 3? Let me know in the comments. Would love to know what your thoughts are there. All right, then we'll move on to the 7th round draft pick, Spencer Anderson. Now, this is a harder one to sort of look at because really the offensive line last year started an uncharacteristic amount of games. It's very rare you are going to get all 5 offensive linemen that start the season playing literally 96% of the snaps or more. The 5 guys, that is very rare. There wasn't major injuries. Now, Dotson's obviously moved on from this list. Cole is definitely the starting center. So Spencer Anderson, let's start with the starts perspective. I think 2 or 3 starts would be awesome for Spencer. I hope that's not at the cost of someone being necessarily injured. Imagine if the Steelers could rest a player going into the playoffs, if that's where they happen to find themselves. How cool would that be? But I do think from a percentage of snaps perspective, Jason has now only played 3.97% of the snaps. That's the closest player, and obviously Cole played the 96%. So that's the difference there. The Steelers also might take an approach of keeping some of their linemen fresh, particularly if they're ahead going into the 4th quarter. Now, the Steelers didn't, and they can just run the football out. They obviously had the 1-2 punch for running the football last year. We've seen McFarland stuff. Maybe they've got literally for once in a long time, they've got 3 genuine running backs that can contribute here. But imagine if the Steelers can get to the stage where they're ahead enough in games, and I had no concept of this happening last year with a rookie quarterback and the Matt Henry offense and not having the right players and all this sort of stuff. But imagine we got into the stage where you could start bringing on, backup or second on the depth chart offensive linemen into the game. I mean, I do think Spencer Anderson would be lucky to play over 5% of the snaps per game. Think about last year, how much you saw Derek Watt, and he only played 6.64% of the offensive snaps. So it's kind of in Spencer Anderson's best interest he doesn't play. And we want that. It's in the Steelers' best interest because of all the guys that are their top linemen. But I will be interested to see if he can get snaps late in games because the Steelers have put themselves in a position to win. And that's going to be the interesting piece. That's how I feel like Spencer Anderson's going to get on the field. But I want to know in the comments, what do you think if let's say all the starters were healthy again through 14, 15 games, do you think Spencer Anderson sees the field? And secondly, what position do you think he's going to see the field at? Because I feel like they're trying to train him up to be the backup center. Particularly because of his athleticism. I think he's a fantastic right guard looking at tape. I know he can play all over the line. I know he started his career at the tackle spot at Maryland, but I do think he's much better on the interior. And I think he'd be an awesome center to have because of his size and weight. My only thing is, can he snap the football? And that's the thing that we've seen, particularly so out of Kendrick Green. That was a struggle. So It will be interesting to see how these Steelers rookies, how many snaps, how many starts they get in 2022. But at the same time, I do think it's kind of this double-edged sword of, do we want to see how much they can play? We want to see them contribute. We don't want them to have to do too much because the Steelers have injuries or the Steelers' best players are, off the field for whatever reason. So it's kind of the catch-22 when it comes to the Steelers rookies. But I'm really excited for how they can contribute, how they can keep people fresh. We've now got a cornerback room that can be kept fresh with Joey Porter Jr. We've now got a tackle room that can be kept fresh with Broderick Jones. We've now got a defensive lineman group that can be kept fresh with Benton. We've also got a outside linebacker and pass rush group that can be kept fresh with the addition of Herbig. And now you also bring in Spencer Anderson to the mix, along with Nate Herbig as the two backup, the two main backup offensive linemen. And this team is getting depth in a way that it never had before. And guys that literally look like in their second, third, maybe it takes 4 years for Spencer Anderson. But these guys can contribute. They're on rookie deals, which makes them cheaper than free agents. This is exciting, and this is how the Steelers are starting. I don't want to say starting to build their dynasty, but are actually putting the pieces together for a dynasty in the 2020s, and it's so exciting to see. But with that, as I said, if you like the show, hit the like button. Let us know your thoughts in the comments of what you thought of this show as well, and any of the findings and things that we said. And hit that sub button if you haven't already. As soon as we get to 1,000 subs, we can start doing competitions that we want to do, interact with you guys in all new different ways, particularly around what we can do in the live shows. And as always, go Steelers.